It began in a quiet, polished studio in New York City. The kind of place where the floors gleam, the cameras wait silently, and everyone knows exactly who holds the power. On that day, the world was about to witness a moment that would reignite one of the most explosive royal controversies of the decade. Meghan Markle, 44, stepped through the doors of Harper's Bazaar's filming location, radiant as always, her presence commanding attention. But what happened next sent shockwaves far beyond the room. She was introduced, not simply as Meghan Markle, but as Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, a title she hadn't legally held in official capacity for years, a title she had promised, through public statements and strategic distancing, she no longer wanted to leverage. And yet, there it was, spoken aloud, echoing through the hushed room, lighting a fuse no one could predict. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the very first second, the tension was palpable. Journalists who had prepared carefully for a routine interview suddenly found themselves on a stage that felt more like a royal courtroom than a media meeting. Caitlin Greenidge, who had been covering the session, later recalled the moment with vivid clarity. The announcement wasn't casual. A house manager formally stated it, a voice carrying authority, ceremony, and weight. Meghan's eyes flickered. Was it acknowledgement, defiance, or a mix of both? Observers couldn't tell. But one thing was undeniable. A single title, casually yet publicly invoked, had reignited decades of intrigue, jealousy, and speculation about the British monarchy's inner workings. From the outside, it may have seemed like a small oversight. But in reality, it was a dramatic misstep that could unravel carefully managed narratives, open old wounds, and provoke one of the most severe reactions in the royal family's recent history. Renee Smith, a top public relations strategist, didn't mince words when the situation first hit the headlines. From a PR perspective, it is such a bad idea, she said in a statement that quickly circulated across media outlets. It is confusing. It is provocative in the wrong way. And it puts her straight back under the royal shadow she always bloody insists she wants to get away from. Confusing, provocative, shadowed. These were words loaded with implications. They hinted at far more than just a public relations blunder. They suggested a collision between personal ambition, public perception, and centuries-old royal protocol. And for Meghan Markle, who had spent years attempting to redefine herself outside the royal spotlight, it was a direct challenge to everything she had tried to control. Why does this story matter now? Because the timing is critical. The Sussexes have been carefully orchestrating their narrative, creating a public persona that distances them from the monarchy while remaining highly profitable and culturally relevant. Every appearance, every interview, every brand venture is part of a meticulously designed plan. Yet here, in a quiet New York studio, that plan collided violently with the reality of royal tradition. Meghan's use of her old title wasn't just a semantic choice. It was a spark in a powder keg. The stakes are higher than ever. King Charles, recently ascending to the throne after decades of careful preparation, is known for his precise attention to protocol and hierarchy. He values order, loyalty, and the preservation of royal integrity above all else. For him, the casual reintroduction of a former royal title in a public setting is not merely inappropriate. It is a provocation, a breach of centuries of unwritten rules, and a potential threat to the dignity of the monarchy itself. According to insiders, discussions behind palace doors were intense, heated, and charged with emotion. Advisors reportedly debated the best course of action, weighing public perception against internal consequences, all while attempting to predict Meghan's response. For Meghan, the consequences are multifaceted. This wasn't merely a matter of etiquette. It could affect her brand, her public image, and even her legal standing. The Duchess of Sussex title carries weight far beyond polite introductions. It implies royal authority, heritage, and legitimacy. By using it without approval, she triggered a response that could potentially close doors forever. And it wasn't just the monarchy watching. The global public, obsessed with royal drama, the media, and social platforms, erupted instantly. Headlines splashed the world over. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from outrage to admiration, from skepticism to sheer disbelief. And in the middle of it all was Meghan, caught in a whirlwind that was part legacy, part celebrity, and entirely unpredictable. Let's pause for a moment and ask, why would someone who has fought so hard to define herself outside of royal shadows risk stepping back into them so publicly? Is it confidence? Carelessness? A calculated move? Or is there something deeper at play? A message, a challenge, or a declaration she felt compelled to make? These questions, at their core, are why this story resonates with millions around the world. It's about power, identity, perception, and the high-stakes game of visibility and influence. And yet, as the cameras rolled and the interview proceeded, Meghan's demeanor suggested that she may have anticipated the fallout. There was poise, certainly, but also something else, a tension that hinted at awareness of the storm she had just triggered. Observers noted her measured responses to questions about Prince Harry, her complex holiday plans, and her reflections on life outside the monarchy. Each answer was layered, precise, and subtly defiant. For the casual viewer, it may have appeared composed, even charming. But for those paying attention, the media professionals, royal watchers, and palace insiders, every word, every smile, every glance was scrutinized for subtext, signaling, and potential missteps. It was a moment that seemed simple, almost mundane on the surface. A celebrity steps into a magazine studio. Cameras roll. Questions are asked. Answers are given. But in reality, this was anything but ordinary. The Harper's Bazaar incident was more than a photo shoot or an interview. It was a flashpoint. A single introduction, a single phrase, set off a chain reaction that would ripple through the royal family, the media, and Meghan Markle's entire public persona. She was introduced as Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. And that one line, so casually delivered, carried a weight that no one outside those walls could have fully understood. Why does one title cause so much chaos? Titles in the royal context aren't mere labels. They're symbols of history, power, and authority. To use them without permission is to challenge centuries of protocol. For Meghan, who has long struggled to define her identity outside the royal sphere, this was a high-risk moment. Was she testing boundaries, or had someone miscalculated for her? Either way, the impact was immediate. Observers within the studio froze. Cameras captured every subtle reaction. The slight hesitation of a journalist, the raised eyebrow of an assistant, the brief glance Meghan gave her team. It was a dance of poise and tension, performed on a stage far more consequential than anyone realized. Caitlin Greenidge, the journalist covering the session, later described the moment with meticulous attention. She recalled the house manager's formal announcement, the almost ceremonial tone, the gravity in the room that made it feel like a royal court rather than a New York magazine shoot. Every detail mattered. The way Meghan paused before stepping forward, the subtle shift in posture, the controlled smile that masked 1,000 unspoken calculations. To the casual observer, it might have appeared as a standard introduction. But to those who knew the stakes, it was explosive. Meghan entered the room fully aware, or at least partly aware, of the consequences. Her gaze scanned the studio. Her posture suggested confidence, control, even defiance. But beneath it, there was a tension that spoke volumes. It was the tension of someone walking a tightrope stretched across two worlds. The glittering world of celebrity and media influence, and the rigid, tradition-bound realm of the British monarchy. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, was being interpreted, analyzed, and catalogued. And for the palace, the moment was nothing short of a crisis in slow motion. From the outside, one could almost imagine the scene. The polished floors reflecting studio lights, the hum of cameras, the faint rustle of papers. Then, the announcement, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. It was a phrase heavy with implications. Former royals are expected to navigate their post-royal lives carefully. There are rules, formalities, and unspoken boundaries. By allowing, or perhaps encouraging, the use of her former title in this public setting, Meghan stepped into dangerous territory. The reaction was instantaneous. A PR strategist might cringe, a historian might gasp, a palace insider might feel a surge of anger. And in that moment, all three reactions occurred simultaneously. Renee Smith, an expert in public relations, was clear about the risks. "It is confusing," she said, "provocative in the wrong way, and puts her straight back under the royal shadow she has been trying to escape. That shadow has always been a double-edged sword for Meghan. On one side, it offers influence, recognition, and a platform few can rival. On the other, it brings scrutiny, pressure, and relentless criticism. The Harper's Bazaar incident reignited every debate, every critique, every conversation about her role, her ambitions, and her choices. Yet, what made this incident so riveting wasn't just the title itself, it was the context. This was not a casual press event. It was a carefully curated, high-profile interview designed to cement her brand, highlight her perspective, and reinforce her narrative. Questions about Prince Harry, their lives in the United States, and her personal projects were lined up. Each one offered a glimpse into the life she had carefully sculpted, the independence she had claimed, and the public persona she had worked tirelessly to maintain. But the reintroduction of her former title, whether intentional or accidental, threatened to undermine it all. Observers began to question her motives. Was she trying to reclaim her former status? Was it a strategic move to assert power in an environment that reveres legacy and influence? Or was it a simple misstep, a moment of carelessness magnified by the intense public gaze? Each theory carried implications, and none of them painted a simple picture. The complexity of Meghan's identity, royal by marriage, celebrity by media presence, activist by choice, made every action subject to scrutiny. Every smile, every pause, every nod was being interpreted as signaling intent, defiance, or remorse. Even as the cameras rolled and the interview continued, subtle cues hinted at tension behind the smiles. Meghan's team was visibly alert, scanning the room, adjusting schedules, and providing silent prompts. The journalists, many of whom had spent years covering the monarchy, were cautious, aware that this was not a typical interview. And the palace, though miles away, had its own reaction forming in real time. Sources later indicated that calls were made, advisors were briefed, and a sense of urgency settled over Buckingham Palace. The casual observer would never see this, but the ripple effects had begun. Meghan's responses during the interview were measured, precise, almost rehearsed. Questions about Prince Harry were answered with care, avoiding unnecessary drama while offering enough personal insight to satisfy curiosity. Her discussion of holiday plans, lifestyle choices, and charitable projects was similarly controlled, each word carefully considered. Yet, the underlying tension, the awareness that her former title had just been publicly invoked, was present in subtle ways. A pause here, a careful smile there, a slight tilt of the head that suggested vigilance. It was the kind of performance that could only be delivered by someone navigating treacherous waters with both skill and caution. And then there was the media. Once the interview was published, social media exploded. Headlines screamed, opinion columns flourished, and public commentary swirled. Some praised her poise and composure. Others criticized the perceived audacity of using a royal title after stepping away from the monarchy. Memes circulated. Hashtags trended. Talk shows dissected every frame. It was, in short, the perfect storm, a convergence of celebrity culture, media frenzy, and royal protocol violations. The world was watching, analyzing, and debating, all while Meghan remained the calm eye at the center of the hurricane. But the most critical reactions, the ones that would determine her future, were not happening online. They were happening in Buckingham Palace. Advisors debated what action, if any, should be taken. The king, known for his meticulous attention to tradition and authority, reportedly expressed disapproval, calling for discussions about boundaries, permissions, and consequences. Private conversations became tense, with officials weighing the risks of public backlash against the need to enforce protocol. And in this storm of strategy, etiquette, and emotion, a decision was being shaped that could redefine Meghan's relationship with the monarchy forever. In that moment, Meghan's use of her former title was no longer just a PR misstep. It was a challenge, intentional or otherwise, to the structures of the royal family. It forced questions that had long been simmering. What limits exist for former royals? How far can one push public identity without provoking a severe response? And perhaps most provocatively, could the king permanently strip a former family member of a title to assert control and protect the institution? The Harper's Bazaar incident, seemingly straightforward on the surface, had opened a Pandora's box. Every observer, from journalists to PR strategists to palace officials, recognized the significance. Every word, every gesture, every decision in the coming days would be scrutinized. And for Meghan, the stakes had never been higher. Titles in the British monarchy are not just ornamental. They carry weight, history, and authority. They are symbols centuries in the making, a chain linking the past to the present and the present to the future. To understand why King Charles's reaction to Meghan Markle's Harper's Bazaar moment was so severe, one must first understand the rules, traditions, and nuances of royal protocol. Because in this world, every word, every gesture, every title, every smile, or misstep is a statement, and there are consequences for breaking the unwritten rules. Let's start with the basics. When someone marries into the royal family, they receive titles as part of the royal structure. These titles, Duke, Duchess, Earl, Countess, are not merely decorative. They signify their position, their responsibilities, and their standing within the monarchy. The title of Duchess of Sussex, for instance, is a mark of honor, a connection to lineage, and a public signal of official status. For Meghan, receiving the title in 2018 was more than a formal nod. It was a statement to the world. She was now a senior member of the royal family, expected to uphold its values and participate in its duties. But what happens when a royal steps away? When Meghan and Harry decided to step back from their roles as senior royals in 2020, a delicate balance had to be struck. The couple was allowed to retain their titles in a technical sense. They didn't become commoners, but they could no longer use them in official capacities or for commercial purposes. This is where the protocol is strict. You can't simply leverage a royal title for personal gain once you've stepped down. Doing so risks confusion, misrepresentation, and, in the eyes of the monarchy, disrespect. To put it in perspective, imagine someone leaves a prestigious company but continues to use their old job title on LinkedIn or in public events, despite no longer being affiliated. It's misleading. It creates questions of authority, trust, and legitimacy. Now imagine that company isn't just any corporation. It's the British monarchy, an institution with centuries of traditions, rules, and public scrutiny. The stakes rise exponentially. That's why the Harper's Bazaar incident was more than a minor faux pas. It was a direct challenge to centuries of protocol. King Charles, who spent decades preparing for his role as monarch, understands these subtleties better than anyone. For him, the monarchy is not just a family, it's an institution. Every title, every ceremony, every protocol is a safeguard of its integrity. Allowing former royals to flout these rules sets a precedent, one that could erode the monarchy's credibility over time. To Charles, Meghan's introduction as Duchess of Sussex was not just inappropriate, it was provocative. It called into question the boundaries of authority, respect, and tradition. Historically, the royal family has dealt with breaches of protocol in very specific ways. Sometimes, corrections are subtle, a whispered reminder, a closed-door meeting, a suggestion to adjust behavior. Other times, actions are formalized in public, making it clear where lines have been crossed. King Charles's reign, though still early, is already demonstrating that he prioritizes order and structure. Allowing Meghan to use her title without sanction would signal weakness. And in the monarchy, weakness is not just dangerous, it's contagious. The complexity of the rules is compounded by the modern media landscape. In previous centuries, royal protocol was enforced largely behind closed doors, away from public scrutiny. Today, every moment is broadcast globally, dissected frame by frame, and debated endlessly online. When Meghan appeared in Harper's Bazaar, she wasn't just interacting with journalists. She was performing for an audience of millions, including the public, palace staff, and historians alike. Every nuance mattered, and every slip could, and did, have far-reaching consequences. The rules themselves are fascinatingly intricate. Titles can be granted, revoked, or restricted by the monarch. They are tied to rank, lineage, and legal precedent. The use of a title in public spaces, media, or commercial enterprises without permission is not merely frowned upon. It can be formally prohibited. There is a careful distinction between social recognition and official status. And in Meghan's case, the line had already been drawn. Her official royal duties ended, and she was expected to respect the boundaries of her former role. But why does this matter so much to Charles personally? For him, the monarchy is more than ceremony. It is a delicate system of symbolism and control. Each title represents not just honor, but hierarchy. Allowing former members to ignore rules undermines the chain of authority. It sends a signal to others. Rules are optional. And for an institution that survives on respect, loyalty, and continuity, that's a threat. Charles's decades-long preparation to ascend the throne have been shaped by such considerations. Every move he makes is measured, deliberate, and protective of the monarchy's legacy. Some may wonder, why respond so harshly over what seems like a minor media introduction? Because, in royal terms, it is never minor. The Harper's Bazaar incident didn't happen in isolation. It came at a time when the Sussexes were expanding their public influence, negotiating media deals, and engaging with a global audience. Using the Duchess of Sussex title in such a setting sends a message, one of authority, legitimacy, and connection to royal lineage. To the king, that wasn't just an oversight. It was a potential encroachment on his authority and the institution itself. The reaction inside Buckingham Palace reportedly involved multiple layers of consultation. Advisors debated whether a formal reprimand was necessary, whether media corrections could suffice, or whether a more permanent solution was required. Sources indicate that the discussions were intense, reflecting the tension between maintaining royal dignity and avoiding public scandal. The decision-makers were acutely aware that any action or inaction would be scrutinized, both domestically and internationally. And the pressure wasn't just institutional, it was personal. King Charles has always placed immense value on family unity and loyalty. Seeing a former member of his family publicly assert a title in a way that challenges the monarchy may have felt like a betrayal. There is an emotional layer to royal protocol that outsiders rarely see. Pride, disappointment, frustration, and the constant balancing of personal feelings with public duty. Meghan's Harper's Bazaar moment was more than a procedural misstep. It was a test of those delicate family dynamics. Meanwhile, Meghan's position was equally complex. She had spent years building her brand, navigating media scrutiny, and defining herself outside the royal framework. Using the Duchess of Sussex title may have seemed natural, perhaps even advantageous, in terms of branding and public recognition. But the rules are unyielding. For her, it was a high-stakes gamble. A single misstep could provoke a response that would affect her reputation, her brand, and her personal relationships with the royal family. For those watching, the situation raises pressing questions. Can former royals maintain influence without overstepping boundaries? Where is the line between personal identity and institutional authority? And how much power does the monarch truly have over former family members who still operate on the global stage? These questions are not just theoretical. They are at the heart of the Harper's Bazaar incident. In the end, the rules of royal protocol are clear, but the enforcement is subtle. Sometimes, it is handled quietly, privately, with minimal public fallout. Other times, actions are decisive, formal, and permanent. Meghan's use of the Duchess of Sussex title fell somewhere in between, publicly provocative, privately concerning, and institutionally significant. The stage was set for a response that would reverberate far beyond the studio in New York. And yet, even with all the rules, historical precedent, and careful planning, no one could predict the full magnitude of what would follow. Because this was not just a matter of protocol. It was personal, political, and emotional. A convergence of power, perception, and legacy. And in the coming days, the decisions made behind palace doors would send shockwaves that would forever alter Meghan Markle's relationship with the monarchy. Stepping away from the British monarchy is not as simple as signing a paper and moving across the Atlantic. It is a decision that reverberates through every facet of life, personal, professional, and public. For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the so-called Megxit was a declaration of independence, freedom, and autonomy. But it also came with a host of unforeseen challenges, navigating public perception, balancing privacy with influence, and maintaining relevance without the official royal platform. The Harper's Bazaar incident became a flashpoint precisely because it touched on all of these tensions. When Meghan and Harry announced their departure from royal duties in early 2020, the world watched in awe, confusion, and, in some quarters, outrage. They were stepping away from centuries of tradition, choosing autonomy over obligation, and media speculation reached a fever pitch. For Harry, the move was deeply personal, a reaction to a lifetime under scrutiny, to the pressures of family expectations, and to a desire to protect his own family. For Meghan, it was about control over her public image, her work, and her future. Together, they were rewriting the rules for modern royals. Yet, freedom comes at a cost. One of the biggest challenges for the couple was maintaining influence while respecting the boundaries that came with leaving the monarchy. Their public appearances, media interviews, and commercial ventures became tools for shaping their narrative. But every action was scrutinized not only by the public, but by the institution they once represented. Titles, protocols, and royal etiquette still loomed large, and the boundaries were subtle yet firm. Crossing them, even unintentionally, could provoke significant backlash. The Harper's Bazaar incident illustrates this perfectly. On the surface, it was a high-profile interview with a respected magazine. But Meghan's use of her former title in that context was interpreted by some as a signal that she had not entirely let go of her royal identity. For a former senior royal, titles are more than a formality. They are a currency of influence. In the modern world, where branding, public perception, and celebrity matter as much as tradition, leveraging that currency is tempting. But it also comes with risk. Meghan's moment in New York was a reminder of how fragile the balance truly is. The couple's post-royal life has been meticulously crafted to maintain relevance while asserting independence. Media deals, such as their Netflix productions, public speaking engagements, and charitable initiatives, all serve to build a narrative of purpose, influence, and autonomy. Yet, the tension remains. How much royal legacy can they utilize without provoking the institution they left behind? This is a question few outside the royal sphere can answer, and one that Meghan and Harry navigate daily. Even minor appearances are fraught with implications. When Meghan stepped into Harper's Bazaar, it wasn't merely an interview. It was a statement. Her poise, her style, her choice of words, even the subtle way she moved in the studio, all communicated something about her identity. Observers noted her careful control over expressions and tone, suggesting awareness of the tightrope she was walking. Each moment was an assertion. She remained influential, informed, and intentional. Yet, it also hinted at a lingering connection to the royal identity she had officially abandoned. The couple's strategy has always been about narrative control. They have consistently attempted to shape their story through media, selectively sharing aspects of their lives while withholding others. Every headline, every appearance, every Instagram post or Netflix project is a piece of the puzzle. But this careful orchestration makes any misstep far more consequential. When a former royal title is used publicly, it is amplified, dissected, and debated. Meghan's introduction as Duchess of Sussex was not a private slip. It became a global talking point, reigniting questions about her motivations, her intentions, and the implications for her brand. Public perception plays a crucial role in the Sussexes' post-royal existence. Meghan and Harry are not just former royals, they are global celebrities. Their actions influence media narratives, social commentary, and even political discourse. Every interview, every public appearance, and every commercial venture carries symbolic weight. Using a royal title, intentionally or not, becomes a statement not only about their personal identity, but also about power, legitimacy, and influence. The Harper's Bazaar incident was a perfect storm of these dynamics: celebrity, royalty, and media colliding in a single, explosive moment. The emotional stakes are high as well. For Meghan, stepping away from the monarchy was meant to provide freedom and protection. Yet, the Harper's Bazaar episode reminds us that freedom does not mean escape. Public scrutiny continues, amplified by history, media fascination, and cultural obsession with royalty. Every action, every decision, every word is interpreted through multiple lenses: celebrity, feminism, race, and royal protocol. The pressure is relentless, and the consequences of even small missteps are magnified. Prince Harry's role adds another layer of complexity. His lifelong navigation of royal expectations and media scrutiny has shaped him into a careful, strategic public figure. His support of Meghan's endeavors is unwavering, yet he also understands the potential dangers of misusing royal association. The Harper's Bazaar incident was not only a challenge for Meghan, it was a test for Harry as well. Could he manage the fallout? Could he balance personal loyalty with the reality of the institution they left behind? The tension between family loyalty and institutional respect became clearer than ever. It's worth considering the contradictions in their post-royal life. They seek autonomy but still rely on the prestige of royal association. They criticize media intrusion yet produce high-profile media projects. They strive for privacy but operate under a spotlight more intense than most celebrities endure. The Harper's Bazaar incident exemplifies this paradox. Meghan's former title brought attention, relevance, and authority, yet it also invited criticism, scrutiny, and backlash. It was the perfect illustration of the double-edged sword they navigate daily. Legal and procedural boundaries further complicate the picture. While the Sussexes retain certain ceremonial privileges, official use of titles in public or commercial settings is restricted. Any breach, intentional or accidental, could provoke legal discussions, palace sanctions, or public statements. This is where protocol meets modern celebrity. The rules exist, but enforcement is complicated by media amplification, public fascination, and the Sussexes' unique position as former royals with global influence. For the public, the Harper's Bazaar moment was captivating drama. For the media, it was a goldmine of narrative possibilities. For the palace, it was a headache of protocol, optics, and authority. And for Meghan and Harry, it was a reminder that post-royal life is never truly separate from the institution they left. Every choice carries weight, every appearance carries implications, and every word carries potential consequences. But what does this mean for the future? Could Meghan continue to use her title without repercussion, or would King Charles act decisively? Could Harry shield her from the consequences, or was this a situation beyond anyone's control? The answers to these questions would unfold behind closed doors, setting the stage for dramatic interventions, strategic decisions, and potential conflicts that could redefine the Sussexes' lives forever. And as the world watched, unaware of the intensity behind palace doors, one thing became clear. Stepping away from the monarchy does not guarantee freedom. Autonomy is fragile, influence is complicated, and even a single misstep, like a seemingly simple title, can ignite a storm with far-reaching consequences. News of Meghan Markle's Harper's Bazaar appearance spread like wildfire, reaching Buckingham Palace within hours. In the quiet corridors lined with portraits of monarchs past, a storm was brewing. A storm invisible to the public eye, but charged with centuries of tradition, duty, and expectation. For the palace, Meghan's use of the Duchess of Sussex title was not just a procedural error. It was a public challenge, a breach of protocol that demanded immediate attention. The reactions were swift, precise, and deeply calculated. Inside the palace, advisors convened emergency meetings. The king's private office was tense. Advisors leaned over polished mahogany tables, speaking in hushed tones about public perception, media optics, and the delicate balance between family loyalty and institutional authority. King Charles, ever meticulous and deliberate, listened to every word. He had prepared his entire life for leadership of the monarchy, for moments when tradition might collide with modernity, and now he faced a situation that required both decisiveness and finesse. The Harper's Bazaar incident was a test of that preparation. Royal protocol is notoriously precise. Every title has a clear purpose. Every ceremonial gesture carries meaning, and every deviation is noticed and remembered. To allow Meghan to publicly use her former title without repercussion would be to send a dangerous signal, not only to the public, but to other members of the royal family. It would blur boundaries, undermine hierarchy, and weaken the very foundation of the monarchy. The palace advisors were unanimous. Action was required. But the question was how to enforce it without escalating a global media firestorm. Sources later described the mood inside Buckingham Palace as strained and urgent. Officials debated multiple options. Could they issue a public statement condemning the misuse of the title? Should they address it privately through legal counsel and correspondence? Was a permanent revocation of the title under consideration, or would that be too severe and spark unnecessary controversy? Every option carried risks, and every risk had potential consequences far beyond the palace walls. King Charles's position was clear. The monarchy could not be perceived as weak or lenient. The institution relies on respect, order, and consistency. Allowing a former senior royal to use a title at will for media attention or branding purposes was a breach that could not stand. This wasn't about personal animosity. It was about preserving centuries of tradition, the integrity of the crown, and the authority of the king. Advisors repeatedly emphasized the importance of acting decisively, carefully, and in a way that maintained public confidence in the monarchy. But there was a complication. Meghan and Harry are not ordinary figures. They are former senior royals, yes, but also global celebrities. Their actions are amplified by media coverage, social media discourse, and public fascination. Any response from the palace would be dissected, scrutinized, and interpreted as either justified, excessive, or vindictive. Every word, every gesture, every decision needed to be calculated with precision. One wrong move, and the palace risked backlash from an audience that is increasingly skeptical of royal authority. Reports indicate that King Charles convened a series of private consultations with senior officials, legal advisors, and communications experts. The aim was clear: determine the most effective way to address Meghan's breach of protocol while protecting the monarchy's reputation. Discussions ranged from subtle interventions, letters, private meetings, reminders of the rules, to more public measures, such as formal announcements restricting the use of royal titles. The debate was complex, balancing legal authority, family dynamics, and the perception of fairness in the public eye. There was also a personal element. King Charles has always valued loyalty and discretion within his family. Seeing Meghan's actions interpreted as either a deliberate provocation or a careless oversight created tension. Some insiders described his reaction as a mix of frustration, disappointment, and resolve. He understood the broader implications. This was not just a question of etiquette. It was a test of authority, a moment that could redefine boundaries for all former royals. The palace reaction was multi-layered. Internally, strict guidance was issued to staff. No one was to acknowledge Meghan's title in any official capacity. Privately, legal teams prepared letters clarifying the rules and reminding the couple of their limitations. Externally, communications teams monitored media coverage, prepared messaging strategies, and coordinated responses to potential public questions. The goal was twofold: assert authority firmly and preserve the monarchy's image of dignity and order. What made the situation so volatile was the convergence of personal, institutional, and public pressures. On one hand, the king needed to protect the integrity of the monarchy. On the other, he had to navigate familial relationships with tact, balancing his authority with understanding. And all the while, the public was watching, analyzing every move, and ready to judge the palace's response. The Harper's Bazaar incident had not only reignited scrutiny on Meghan and Harry, but had also cast a spotlight on the monarchy itself, forcing the institution to act with unprecedented speed and clarity. The response was deliberate. Internal memos emphasized that Meghan's title could no longer be used in media appearances, commercial ventures, or public engagements. Legal counsel drafted formal communications outlining potential consequences for further misuse. Advisors suggested framing the action as a reinforcement of long-standing rules rather than a punitive measure. Yet, despite careful planning, the palace knew that the public would interpret it in multiple ways. Some as necessary enforcement, others as harsh or even vindictive. Meanwhile, the media began connecting the dots. Royal commentators, journalists, and social media influencers speculated endlessly. Why had Meghan used her title? Was it a strategic move to maintain influence? Had she misunderstood the rules? Or was it a subtle challenge to King Charles's authority? Every article, every tweet, every opinion segment amplified the pressure, making the palace's careful handling even more critical. But even as the palace moved to enforce protocol, they were acutely aware of the stakes. Meghan and Harry are not easily silenced. Their global platform allows them to shape narratives, influence public opinion, and respond in ways that could escalate conflicts. A misstep in handling the situation could lead to a PR disaster, undermining both the monarchy's authority and the institution's credibility. For King Charles, this was not just about rules. It was about survival, perception, and legacy. The tension inside the palace was mirrored outside. Royal watchers noted that Meghan's appearance in Harper's Bazaar seemed to intentionally or unintentionally blur the line between former royal status and current celebrity influence. This raised troubling questions. Could a former royal effectively operate as both an independent public figure and a representative of the monarchy's legacy? And if not, what measures would the king take to enforce boundaries that had long been established but rarely tested in such a high-profile context? In short, the palace reaction was swift, calculated, and decisive. But it was only the beginning. Every legal notice, private warning, and internal memo set the stage for a dramatic escalation that would ultimately reach a point of no return. The Harper's Bazaar incident had sparked a chain of events that could lead to permanent consequences for Meghan Markle. Consequences that were unprecedented, irreversible, and deeply personal. And as the palace prepared its next move, one truth became clear: the story was far from over. It is rare for a monarch to take decisive action against a family member, especially one who has been part of the royal family as recently as Meghan Markle. Yet the Harper's Bazaar incident forced King Charles into a position he had long hoped never to occupy: the delicate, uncomfortable, and unprecedented act of formally stripping a former royal of their title. This was not a symbolic gesture or a temporary reprimand. It was a profound declaration of authority, a move that sent shockwaves through the palace, the media, and the public. The process began quietly, behind closed doors. Advisors briefed the king on all legal and historical precedents. They reviewed past cases where titles were restricted, revoked, or clarified. Most examples involved ancient disputes over succession, illegitimacy, or ceremonial missteps, not a former senior royal using a title in a media appearance. In many ways, this situation was unprecedented, forcing the king and his team to carefully navigate uncharted territory. Every decision carried weight, every misstep could be amplified globally, and every action would be scrutinized by millions. King Charles convened a council of senior advisors, legal counsel, and palace officials. They debated the consequences, the optics, and the timing. Some argued for a private warning, letters, formal reminders, or mediated discussions. Others emphasized the need for a public declaration to assert the monarchy's authority. The stakes were high. A lenient approach might embolden others or set a precedent for former royals. A harsh approach risked backlash, media outrage, and damage to the family image. After days of consultation, the king's decision was clear: Meghan Markle would be permanently restricted from using the title Duchess of Sussex. The decision was not made lightly. King Charles understood the emotional weight, the personal ramifications, and the public scrutiny that would follow. For Meghan, this was more than a loss of a formal designation. It was a stripping away of the symbolic connection to the institution she had married into. Titles in the monarchy are tied to identity, authority, and history. To revoke one is to challenge perception, to signal boundaries, and to assert control. In this case, the king was sending a clear message. Former royals may enjoy personal freedom, but they cannot claim institutional authority or misuse royal designations for personal gain. The formal communication was carefully crafted. Legal counsel prepared a letter detailing the decision, citing protocol, precedent, and the expectations of former senior royals. It outlined explicitly that Meghan was no longer permitted to use the title Duchess of Sussex in any public, media, or commercial capacity. The language was precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. It was not punitive in tone, but it was final. The decision emphasized that the title was a privilege of service, not a personal brand, and that stepping away from royal duties meant relinquishing the right to wield it publicly. For Meghan, receiving this notice was undoubtedly a shock. She had already navigated intense public scrutiny, complex media deals, and global attention. Yet the formal revocation carried a different weight. It was not commentary or critique. It was an institutional action from the very heart of the monarchy. It was the kind of declaration that is rarely made lightly, and when it is, it reverberates across decades, history, and public perception. The loss of her title represented a clear boundary. The monarchy would not bend to celebrity, media influence, or personal ambition. Inside Buckingham Palace, reactions were a mixture of relief, tension, and anticipation. Advisors recognized the significance. The king had asserted authority while maintaining composure, tradition, and legal rigor. Staff carefully coordinated internal messaging to ensure that palace officials, household staff, and associated institutions were aware of the change. Simultaneously, communications teams began planning how to manage media coverage, framing the decision as an enforcement of long-standing rules rather than a personal rebuke. Every word, every sentence, every nuance mattered, because the global audience would dissect the action relentlessly. The media, of course, erupted the moment news of the revocation leaked. Headlines were dramatic. King Charles strips Meghan Markle of royal title. Duchess of Sussex permanently banned. Monarchy draws line in the sand. Social media debates exploded, with commentators questioning whether the action was justified or excessive. Royal experts analyzed the precedent, while fans and critics alike weighed in on Meghan's reaction and possible responses. The story dominated news cycles, fueled by both the shock factor and the centuries-old fascination with royal drama. But beyond the media spectacle, the decision had profound implications for Meghan and Harry's personal and professional lives. The title had been a key part of their branding strategy, a subtle signal of legitimacy and connection to an institution revered worldwide. Losing it meant recalibrating public appearances, media engagements, and even commercial ventures. It required a reassessment of how to communicate influence, authority, and credibility without the symbolic weight of royal designation. For a couple navigating global scrutiny, this was a seismic shift. Emotionally, the decision cut deep. Titles are more than formality. They are a recognition of service, position, and belonging. For Meghan, having her formal royal identity restricted meant redefining how she was perceived both publicly and personally. For Harry, it underscored the reality of leaving the monarchy. Independence comes at a cost, and privileges once taken for granted are not guaranteed. The couple would have to adapt, strategize, and respond to maintain relevance while respecting the boundaries of the institution they had left. The palace, meanwhile, watched the fallout carefully. Every public reaction, every media interpretation, every social media thread was monitored. The goal was not just enforcement, but narrative control. To reinforce the monarchy's authority, uphold tradition, and maintain dignity. The revocation of Meghan's title was a statement, both symbolic and practical. It clarified boundaries, reaffirmed hierarchy, and sent a message to other royals and the public alike. Privileges come with responsibilities, and crossing the line carries consequences. The global audience, however, could not yet grasp the full implications. What did this mean for Meghan's future projects, media appearances, and branding? Would Harry and Meghan push back publicly or quietly comply? How would this decision affect their public image and their relationship with the monarchy? These questions loomed large, creating tension, speculation, and a media frenzy that would continue for months. And yet, the king's move was only the beginning. Stripping a title is a significant step, but the palace knew that controlling the narrative, anticipating responses, and managing consequences would require ongoing vigilance. The Harper's Bazaar incident had sparked a chain reaction that would reshape Meghan Markle's relationship with the royal family, the media, and the public forever. The world waited with bated breath. Meghan Markle had been formally stripped of her Duchess of Sussex title, a move unprecedented in modern royal history. Public opinion was polarized, debates were raging online, and media outlets were dissecting every detail. But the most anticipated moment was Meghan's own response. How would she react to the king's decision? Would she push back publicly, retreat quietly, or transform the moment into a calculated statement about autonomy and identity? Almost immediately, her response began to take shape, not in a press release, not in a direct interview, but in carefully curated appearances and subtle messaging. Meghan, ever the strategist, knew the power of timing, optics, and narrative. This was not merely about defending herself. It was about reclaiming agency while navigating the complicated interplay of public perception, personal identity, and global attention. Every gesture, word, and appearance was deliberately chosen. The first public sign came in the form of her social media presence. Posts on Instagram and other platforms began to emphasize independence, self-definition, and personal accomplishment. Quotes about identity, empowerment, and resilience circulated widely. Followers interpreted these posts as veiled responses to the loss of her title, hinting that while the monarchy could strip privileges, it could not strip identity, influence, or voice. For Meghan, this was an assertion. She remained relevant, influential, and in control of her narrative. Simultaneously, Meghan's media engagements reflected careful calibration. Interviews, features, and public appearances avoided direct confrontation with the palace, but subtly highlighted her ongoing work, philanthropic initiatives, and creative ventures. In doing so, she transformed a potential moment of humiliation into an opportunity to reinforce her personal brand. The Duchess, stripped of her official title, was still Meghan Markle, the public figure, activist, and global influencer who commanded attention on her own terms. But there was tension beneath the surface. Observers noticed moments of restraint and calculated expression. Meghan's poise, her carefully modulated tone, and her choice of words suggested a deep awareness of the stakes. Every public statement was a balancing act: assert autonomy, maintain dignity, and avoid giving the palace or critics additional leverage. It was a dance between empowerment and caution, self-expression and strategic compliance. The Harper's Bazaar incident had sparked controversy, and now every move she made was amplified, scrutinized, and analyzed across multiple platforms and time zones. Analysts noted the duality in her messaging. On one hand, she highlighted independence and self-definition. On the other, she subtly reinforced connections to royal legacy through references to charitable initiatives, public service, and advocacy work, areas historically associated with the royal family. It was a delicate blend, distancing herself from formal titles while maintaining moral authority and legitimacy. This dual strategy allowed her to assert influence without openly challenging the monarchy. Her legal team and advisors were deeply involved behind the scenes. Every word, appearance, and engagement was reviewed for compliance with the new restrictions. Media interactions were scripted with precision to avoid claims of protocol violation while still allowing Meghan to assert her identity. This strategic layer was critical. Missteps could provoke additional legal action, palace backlash, or renewed media attacks. Meghan's team understood the stakes. In this game, perception was as important as reality. Public reactions were swift and divided. Fans of the Sussexes praised Meghan's composure, celebrating her resilience and her ability to navigate unprecedented circumstances. Social media campaigns highlighted empowerment narratives, framing her as a symbol of modern independence and female agency. Critics, meanwhile, accused her of exploiting the controversy for publicity, framing her continued visibility as a deliberate provocation against the monarchy. The media frenzy became a feedback loop, amplifying every gesture, statement, and post, and ensuring that Meghan's public response remained front-page news for weeks. Amid this, Meghan's appearance at charity events and advocacy initiatives took on heightened significance. Each appearance was analyzed for subtle messaging. Her attire, her words, even the causes she championed were interpreted through the lens of her new status. Without a royal title, these appearances were now statements of personal influence rather than institutional authority. The world watched as Meghan continued to command attention, demonstrating that a stripped title did not diminish her capacity to shape narratives or inspire action. Yet the internal stakes were just as high. Meghan's team knew that any miscalculation could provoke additional palace interventions, further legal restrictions, or intensified media scrutiny. This was not merely a PR challenge. It was a battle for narrative control in real time. Every move was calculated, every statement vetted, and every appearance orchestrated to balance empowerment with compliance. The stakes were enormous. In one misstep, decades of reputation building could unravel. Interestingly, Meghan's response also revealed her evolving relationship with public identity. In prior years, Much of her focus had been on navigating royal expectations. Post-stripping, the challenge shifted. Asserting independence while acknowledging the lingering influence of the monarchy in public perception. This required a sophisticated understanding of media, symbolism, and audience psychology. Each gesture was not only a response to the king's decision, but also a broader commentary on power, influence, and self-determination in the modern world. Critically, Meghan's response did not escalate conflict openly. There was no public confrontation, no direct criticism of the king, and no legal challenge announced immediately. This restraint amplified the impact of her messaging. By maintaining dignity, emphasizing personal agency, and subtly reinforcing her continued relevance, she transformed a moment of potential disempowerment into a demonstration of strategic resilience. Observers described it as a masterclass in public narrative management. Behind the scenes, however, tension remained. Palace sources reported concern about potential future missteps. Advisors debated whether Meghan's continued high-profile engagements might require additional clarifications regarding title usage. At the same time, the Sussexes' global media influence made enforcement delicate. A heavy-handed response could backfire, triggering public sympathy for Meghan and criticism of the monarchy. Every decision required precision, foresight, and calculated restraint. The combination of public reaction, media scrutiny, and palace oversight created a perfect storm. Meghan's response demonstrated that influence is not solely tied to titles or institutional authority. Even stripped of her official designation, she could shape narratives, dominate media discourse, and maintain relevance on a global scale. But the challenge was constant. Navigate carefully, assert power subtly, and avoid giving the palace or critics an opportunity to claim victory. And yet, as Meghan continued to project confidence, autonomy, and resilience, the palace prepared its next move. Behind the scenes, advisors monitored every engagement, analyzed public perception, and calculated potential next steps. The king understood that enforcement of protocol was not a single act. It was an ongoing process. Meghan's response had been impressive, but would it be enough to withstand the full weight of institutional authority? The tension escalated. Meghan had asserted herself publicly, reshaping the narrative in her favor. But the monarchy, guided by King Charles, was not finished. Every move she made would be scrutinized, every appearance analyzed, and every word weighed for compliance with the rules of former royals. The stage was set for the next confrontation, a moment that could redefine the Sussexes' post-royal existence forever. The moment news broke that Meghan Markle had been formally stripped of her Duchess of Sussex title, the media erupted. Headlines blazed across screens worldwide. Royal shock. Meghan's title revoked. King Charles draws the line. Monarchy versus the Sussexes. The battle intensifies. Every channel, every website, every social media platform became a battleground for opinion, speculation, and sensationalism. The Harper's Bazaar incident, which had already generated global attention, now evolved into a story of historic consequence, catapulting Meghan's post-royal life into uncharted territory. From the United States to the United Kingdom, media outlets dissected the events with relentless scrutiny. Royal correspondents debated motives, optics, and precedents. Some framed King Charles's decision as a necessary enforcement of centuries-old rules, a move to protect the monarchy's integrity. Others painted it as an unprecedented and harsh rebuke, a dramatic power play by a king asserting authority over a family member. The coverage was instant, and the global audience consumed it voraciously. Social media amplified the frenzy. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok exploded with debates, memes, and hashtags. Hashtag Duchess stripped, hashtag Royal shock, and hashtag Meghan versus monarchy trended within hours. Fans of the Sussexes criticized the monarchy, framing Meghan as a target of institutional sexism and public scrutiny. Critics, on the other hand, argued that the revocation was long overdue, highlighting previous missteps and perceived misuse of royal privileges. The debate was heated, polarizing audiences, and generating more coverage in a feedback loop that seemed unstoppable. The coverage was not just limited to traditional news outlets. Influencers, YouTubers, and podcasters dissected every nuance, offering theories, predictions, and commentary. Video analyses comparing Meghan's Harper's Bazaar introduction with past royal appearances went viral. Opinion pieces debated the legality, ethics, and long-term implications of revoking a former royal title. The story dominated news cycles for weeks, ensuring that the revocation would not fade from public consciousness quickly. International reactions added another layer of complexity. In the United States, Meghan's home country, public sentiment was largely sympathetic. Media outlets highlighted her independence, her philanthropic work, and her resilience in the face of institutional pressure. In Europe, royal observers and historians debated the significance of the king's decision, placing it in the context of centuries of royal tradition. Even countries with no direct ties to the British monarchy weighed in, interpreting the story as a dramatic tale of authority, family conflict, and celebrity influence. Interestingly, the media narrative began to diverge between two distinct storylines. One emphasized institutional authority, the monarchy as a centuries-old institution asserting control over its members, ensuring continuity, and protecting tradition. The other highlighted individual agency. Meghan as a former royal asserting independence, navigating scrutiny, and redefining identity in the modern world. This dual narrative created tension, engagement, and endless discussion, fueling curiosity and ensuring that the story remained a topic of fascination across demographics and geographies. Royal commentators offered detailed analyses. They noted that while title revocations had occurred historically, the circumstances surrounding Meghan were unique. No former senior royal in recent history had been stripped of a title publicly while simultaneously maintaining a global media presence, influence, and celebrity status. The combination of legal authority, media attention, and personal branding created a new paradigm for understanding the modern monarchy and its limitations. Public reactions reflected the intensity of the moment. Supporters of Meghan framed her as a figure of empowerment, portraying the revocation as an example of institutional overreach. Campaigns advocating for her independence, agency, and rights proliferated on social media. Critics, meanwhile, argued that the move was justified, emphasizing the importance of protocol, hierarchy, and respect for the institution. Polls indicated a deeply divided public, with opinions often aligning with national or cultural perspectives on monarchy, celebrity, and gender dynamics. In the midst of this media storm, palace communications worked overtime. Spokespersons issued careful statements reinforcing the enforcement of protocol without criticizing Meghan personally. Internal staff monitored media coverage, prepared responses to questions, and coordinated with legal teams to manage potential challenges. The objective was clear: protect the monarchy's credibility while avoiding escalation, misinterpretation, or additional public controversy. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's team remained active behind the scenes. Advisors and publicists closely monitored media narratives, shaping responses and managing messaging. Social media posts, interviews, and public appearances were strategically timed to reinforce autonomy, highlight personal initiatives, and maintain relevance. Every move was deliberate, carefully calculated to avoid additional conflicts with the palace while asserting influence in the global arena. The global fascination was also fueled by the human drama underlying the story. Beyond titles, protocols, and media appearances, this was a narrative of family conflict, personal ambition, and the clash between tradition and modernity. Audiences were captivated not just by the formalities, but by the personalities, decisions, and emotions at play. The story was relatable on a human level: power, authority, and family dynamics, magnified to a scale almost unimaginable in ordinary life. As coverage intensified, the ripple effects became apparent. Media organizations began producing documentaries, investigative pieces, and long-form analyses. Every interview Meghan gave, every public appearance Harry made, and every palace statement was scrutinized in this heightened environment. The Harper's Bazaar incident, once a single moment in New York, had now become a catalyst for months of global attention, debate, and speculation. Amid the frenzy, questions arose about the future. How would this affect Meghan's commercial ventures, her media projects, and public engagements? Would the palace take further measures to clarify boundaries? Could the Sussexes' global influence challenge the monarchy's authority in unexpected ways? These questions created tension and anticipation, ensuring that public attention would remain riveted. And while Meghan skillfully navigated this storm, asserting independence and resilience, the palace quietly prepared for its next strategic move. Every development was being monitored, every media reaction analyzed, and every potential challenge anticipated. The title revocation